The great chamber of Zenith Prime Station floated in the darkness of space like a jewel among the stars. Inside its massive walls, representatives from 47 different alien species gathered for what would become the most important meeting in galactic history. None of them knew it yet. Most of them barely cared about the day's agenda. Ambassador Elena Vasquez walked through the towering corridors with steady steps. Her black diplomatic uniform bore the blue and white emblem of United Earth. She was 53 years old, with gray streaks in her dark hair and lines around her eyes that came from 2 decades of negotiating with aliens who thought humans were little more than clever children. Today, those lines seemed deeper than usual. Her assistant, Marcus Chen, rushed to keep pace beside her. He was young, barely 30, and still believed that logic and evidence mattered in these halls. Elena knew better. She had learned the hard way that the Galactic Council operated on power, tradition, and barely concealed contempt for newer species. Ambassador, the Jathir delegation arrived an hour early, Marcus said, his voice tight with worry. They brought 3 times the usual number of aides, and they requested an emergency session. Elena stopped walking. Emergency sessions were rare. They were reserved for genuine crises, invasions, or discoveries that threatened the stability of known space. The Jathir wouldn't call one unless they planned something big. What's the stated reason? She asked. Marcus pulled up his datapad. Territorial violations by human colony ships. They claim we crossed into restricted space near the outer veil. Elena felt ice settle in her stomach. The outer veil was nowhere near any human colony route. Their navigation logs would prove it. But proof didn't always matter here. They're making a move, she said quietly. Get our legal team ready. Pull every navigation record from our colony ships in that sector for the past 5 years. And Marcus, send a priority message to Earth. Tell them we might have a problem. The emergency session began 2 hours later. The council chamber was a massive circular room with seats arranged in ascending tiers. Each species had a designated section, with the oldest and most powerful civilizations seated closest to the center floor. The High Arbiter's platform rose above them all, a throne from which Qthen, an ancient insectoid being, presided over the assembled governments. Humans sat in the outer ring, in Section 43. It had been 23 years since Earth discovered faster-than-light travel and made first contact. 23 years since humanity learned they were the youngest, newest, and least respected species in a galaxy that had been politically organized for over 12,000 years. High Arbiter Qthen's voice echoed through the chamber. The translation implants in every delegate's ear rendered his clicking speech into understandable words. This emergency session is called to order. Councillor Jakar of the Jathir Dominion has brought urgent charges. The floor recognizes the Dominion. Jakar rose from his seat. He was impressive even by Jathir standards. Nearly 8 feet tall, covered in dark green scales that gleamed under the chamber lights with eyes like polished obsidian. His species had been part of the council for 6,000 years. They commanded respect and fear in equal measure. High Arbiter honored councillors, Jakar began, his voice smooth and confident. I bring before you evidence of a grave violation. The human species, admitted to this council merely 2 decades ago, has demonstrated the very behavior we feared when we debated their membership. He gestured, and holographic displays appeared throughout the chamber. They showed star charts, navigation data, and what appeared to be human ships crossing into marked territory. 3 human colony vessels deliberately entered the Kethris sector, which has been designated restricted space for 400 years. This sector borders Jathir's sovereign territory. These incursions represent not accidents, but a pattern of expansion that threatens the established order. Elena was already on her feet. High Arbiter, I must object. We have received no prior complaints, no warnings, no diplomatic communications about any violations. This is the first we're hearing of these charges. Qthen's translator rendered his response with barely concealed disdain. Ambassador Vasquez, you will have your opportunity to speak. Councillor Jakar has the floor. Elena sat back down, her jaw tight. Beside her, Marcus was frantically pulling up their own navigation data. His face went pale as he looked at the results. Ambassador, he whispered, our ships were nowhere near Kethris during these dates. These readings are falsified. Elena already knew that. What worried her was whether anyone else in the chamber cared. Jakar continued his presentation for 20 minutes. He spoke of human aggression, human unpredictability, human disregard for established law. He painted a picture of a dangerous species that needed to be controlled before they threatened the peace that the Council had maintained for millennia. The Jathir Dominion does not bring this matter lightly, Jakar said, his voice taking on a harder edge. We understand that young species make mistakes, but these violations cannot stand unanswered. We therefore propose the following resolution. The holographic displays changed. Now they showed 3 human colonies, 3 worlds where millions of people lived and worked and raised their children. The human colonies of New Sarajevo, Port Darwin, and Stella Libre will be transferred to Jathir administration as reparation for these violations. The human populations will be relocated to other human worlds within a standard year. This will serve as a reminder that all species, no matter how new or ambitious, must respect the boundaries set by this council. The chamber erupted, not in outrage at the outrageous demand, but in murmured conversations and nodding heads. Elena felt her blood turn cold. They were actually considering this. They were going to let the Jathir take 3 entire human worlds based on fabricated evidence. High Arbiter, I demand to present our evidence. Elena's voice cut through the murmurs. Q then clicked his mandibles in what might have been irritation. Very well, Ambassador. Present your defense. Elena stepped down to the center floor. Her hands shook slightly as she activated her own display, but her voice remained steady. She had faced down corporate raiders, warlords, and corrupt politicians back on Earth. She wouldn't be intimidated by oversized lizards and ancient bugs. Honorable counselors, what you've been shown is a fabrication. Our navigation logs, which are quantum-locked and impossible to falsify, show that no human vessel entered Kethris sector during the dates in question. In fact, no human vessel has been within 10 light-years of that sector in the past 5 years. She brought up the data, clean, clear, undeniable proof. The ships the Jathir claimed had violated their space had actually been on the opposite side of human territory, thousands of light-years away. Furthermore, Elena continued, we were never contacted about any violations. Galactic law requires warnings and diplomatic channels to be exhausted before punitive measures are proposed. The Jathir have bypassed all protocols. This isn't about justice. This is about taking our worlds. She looked directly at Jakar. The question is why? What do they really want? Jakar's scales seemed to darken. The human dares to accuse the Dominion of deception? This is exactly the kind of aggressive posturing we warned about. But a few counselors were looking at Elena's data now. Counselor Vinar, a crystalline being whose species valued logic above all else, spoke up. The human navigation data does appear authentic. High Arbiter, should we not investigate these discrepancies before voting on such a serious measure? The Jathir evidence was reviewed and validated by the Council's technical committee. Q then replied, I see no reason to delay a vote. Elena's heart sank. The technical committee was composed of species loyal to the old guard, the ancient civilizations that had run the Council for thousands of years. Of course they had validated false evidence. They wanted to teach the upstart humans a lesson. High Arbiter, you cannot be serious, Elena said, abandoning diplomatic language. You're going to let them take our colonies based on lies? You're going to displace millions of people without even a proper investigation? Ambassador Vasquez, you forget yourself, Q then said coldly. This council has maintained peace and order for 12 millennia. We do not make decisions lightly. Your species is young. You do not understand the delicate balance we maintain. Perhaps this lesson will teach you humility. The vote was called. As each species declared their position, Elena felt the weight of inevitability crushing down on her. 42 votes in favor, 5 opposed, mostly species that had been admitted to the council within the last 1,000 years and still remembered what it felt like to be powerless. Humanity's lone vote against meant nothing. The resolution passed. Elena stood in the center of the chamber as the vote was recorded. Around her, counselors were already leaving, moving on to other business. 3 human worlds had just been handed over to a hostile power, and most of them didn't care enough to stay for the aftermath. Jakar approached her, his posture radiating triumph. Ambassador, I trust you will cooperate with the transition. The Dominion will be sending administrative personnel to the colonies within the month. We expect full cooperation from your people. Elena looked up at him. She was a small human woman, barely 5.5 feet tall. Jakar towered over her, but she didn't flinch. You're making a mistake, she said quietly. A terrible mistake. Jakar's laugh was like gravel grinding. Is that a threat, little human? Will your species file a formal complaint? Write a strongly worded letter? No, Elena said. I'm stating a fact. You don't know us. None of you do. You think we're weak because we're new. You think we'll just accept this because we're outnumbered. You're wrong. And what will humanity do? Jacques asked, still amused. Your entire fleet consists of perhaps 300 vessels. The Dominion commands 10,000. The Council species together have over 1 million ships. What can you possibly do? Elena met his obsidian eyes. I don't know yet. But I know this. Humanity doesn't surrender its people. Not to anyone, not ever. You've taken 3 of our worlds. You've declared that our sovereignty, our rights, our children mean nothing to you. You've shown us that this council doesn't care about justice, only power. She stepped closer, her voice dropping so only Jacques could hear. You've made an enemy today. I hope it was worth it. Jacques's amusement faded slightly. For just a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Uncertainty, perhaps. But then his arrogance returned. Return to your world, Ambassador. Tell your leaders to comply peacefully. It will be easier for everyone. Elena turned away and walked back to her delegation. Marcus and the others looked at her with a mixture of fear and anger. They all knew what this meant. War might be coming. A war they couldn't possibly win. As they left the chamber, Elena paused at the massive doors and looked back. High Arbiter Q then was already presiding over the next item of business. The counselors were laughing, chatting, making deals. To them, this had been a minor matter. A small correction to keep the new species in line. They had no idea what they had just started. Elena pulled out her personal communicator and opened an encrypted channel directly to Earth's government. When the connection established, she spoke clearly and calmly. This is Ambassador Vasquez. The vote has been called. We lost. The Council has authorized the Jothir Dominion to seize New Sarajevo, Port Darwin, and Stella Libre. They fabricated evidence, ignored our proof, and pushed it through on a fixed vote. As of now, we cannot rely on galactic law to protect us. We cannot rely on the Council to act in good faith. I am requesting immediate recall for consultation. Earth needs to decide how we respond to this, because if we don't stand up now, they'll take everything. She closed the channel and stood in the corridor of Zenith Prime Station. Outside the viewport, stars glittered in the endless dark. Somewhere out there on 3 human worlds, millions of people were going about their lives, unaware that they had just been sold by beings who considered themselves the guardians of civilization. Elena thought about her own children back on Earth. She thought about every human child on those 3 colonies. She thought about what it meant to be human, to come from a species that had fought and clawed its way up from caves and savanna to reach the stars. The Council thought humanity was weak. They thought humans would bend, would accept, would learn their place in the galactic order. They were about to learn how wrong they were. As Elena walked toward her ship, she didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know if Earth would choose war or diplomacy, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. The Galactic Council had just made the worst mistake in its 12,000-year history. They had taught humanity that justice meant nothing, that treaties meant nothing, that their children's lives meant nothing to the powers that ruled the galaxy, and humanity was about to teach them a lesson in return. The kind of lesson that would echo through the ages, the kind of lesson that began with 3 simple words she had spoken to Jacques. You're making a mistake. In the coming months, those words would haunt the council chambers. They would be repeated in 1,000 languages across 1,000 worlds. They would become a warning that every species in the galaxy would learn to heed, but that was still to come. For now, Elena Vasquez walked through the corridors of Zenith Prime Station, heading home to Earth, carrying with her the news that would change everything. Behind her, in the Great Council Chamber, the representatives of 47 species continued their business, unaware that they had just lit a fuse, unaware that the explosion was coming, unaware that humanity, pushed too far, was about to show the galaxy what happens when you mistake patience for weakness. The Council's arrogance had sealed their fate, and where it all began, in those ancient chambers of power, the seeds of terror had been planted. The message reached Earth 47 hours after the Council vote. By the time the encrypted data packages finished downloading into the United Earth Government's secure servers, Ambassador Vasquez was already halfway home, traveling through the void in her diplomatic vessel. In Geneva, in the Great Hall where Earth's unified government met, Silence fell as the council session recording played. Representatives from every nation watched as their colonies were voted away like pieces on a game board. They watched Jakar's smug presentation. They watched Elena's futile defense. They watched 42 alien civilizations decide that human lives and human sovereignty meant nothing. Chancellor Maria Santos sat at the head of the massive table, her dark eyes fixed on the holographic display. She was 70 years old, had survived 2 assassination attempts and a corporate war in her youth, and was considered one of the toughest politicians Earth had ever produced. As the recording ended, her expression remained completely neutral. "Analysis," she said simply. Admiral James Chen stepped forward. He was no relation to Marcus Chen, though they shared the common surname. James was 61, with silver hair cut military short, and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. He had commanded Earth's defense forces for 12 years, and had been planning for exactly this scenario since humanity joined the Council. "The Jathir Dominion will move fast," he said. "They'll want to establish control before we can organize resistance. I estimate we have 2 weeks, maybe 3, before their fleets arrive at our colonies. Can we defend them?" Santos asked. Chen's jaw tightened. "No, ma'am. Not with our current deployed forces. Each colony has a standard defense flotilla, maybe 30 ships each. The Jathir will come with overwhelming force. Hundreds of ships, possibly thousands. If we fight with what we have in place, we'll lose, and we'll lose hard. What about reinforcements? Pull ships from other sectors?" "We could," Chen said slowly. "But that would leave our other colonies vulnerable. And we'd still be outnumbered 10 to 1. The Jathir have been a spacefaring civilization for 6,000 years. Their military is massive, well-trained, and they have technology we're still trying to understand." A representative from the Pacific Union, Councillor Akane Tanaka, spoke up. "Then we have no choice. We evacuate the colonies. We save who we can and file protests through every diplomatic channel available. Evacuate 4.7 million people in 2 weeks? Another representative, Marcus Webb from the Atlantic Federation, shook his head. "Even if we had the ships, which we don't, the Jathir won't give us time." You saw Jakar's attitude. They think we're insects. They'll move when they want, not when we're ready. The arguing began then. Voices rose around the table. Some demanded immediate military action, no matter the cost. Others insisted diplomacy was the only path. A few suggested sending envoys to other council species, trying to build a coalition against the Jathir. Chancellor Santos let them argue for exactly 10 minutes. Then she raised her hand and silence fell immediately. "Admiral Chen," she said, "your honest assessment. What happens if we fight?" Chen met her eyes. "We lose. Maybe not immediately, but eventually. The Jathir have the numbers and the technology. If we commit to a military defense of those 3 colonies, we'll be declaring war on a power that can crush us. And if we don't fight, then we lose anyway," Chen said quietly. "We lose those colonies. We lose our people. And we send a message to every other species in the galaxy that humans can be pushed around. The Jathir won't stop at 3 worlds. Once they know we won't fight, they'll take more and more, until we have nothing left." Santos nodded slowly. She had already reached the same conclusion, but she needed her advisors to reach it too. "There's a third option," Chen continued. "One I've been preparing for since we joined the Council." Every eye in the room turned to him. "The public fleet numbers we've released. The forces the Council knows about. That's about 300 ships. The Jathir think that's our entire navy. Every Council species thinks that's all we have." Chen's expression didn't change, but something hard glinted in his eyes. "They're wrong." Santos leaned forward. "Explain." "Humanity has been building ships for 20 years, Chen said. "Not just the public vessels we show off at Council functions. We've been building warships in hidden shipyards across 50 star systems. Underground facilities, automated construction platforms in deep space, converted asteroids. We've been preparing for the day when the Council's politeness ran out." "How many ships?" Santos asked. 2,000 warships. Another 3,000 support vessels. Weapons systems the Council banned as unnecessarily cruel. Tactics developed specifically to counter their standard military doctrines. We've studied every Council species' combat records. We know how they fight, and we've designed our entire military to beat them." The room sat in stunned silence. Councillor Tanaka found her voice first. "You've been hiding a fleet of 2,000 warships from the Galactic Council?" That's a massive violation of the Military Transparency Accord. Yes, Chen said simply. It is, I recommended it. Chancellor Reeves approved it 10 years ago. We've maintained the secret through 3 administrations, because every chancellor who's been briefed on the Galactic situation has reached the same conclusion. The Council tolerates us only as long as we're weak. The moment we have real power, they'll move to contain us, so we made them think we were weak while we built strength in secret. This will be seen as a betrayal, Webb said. If we reveal this fleet, we'll lose any diplomatic credibility we have. Santos laughed, a bitter sound. Diplomatic credibility? Marcus, they just voted to hand 3 of our worlds over to the Jathir, based on fabricated evidence. They didn't care about our proof. They didn't care about justice. They voted to teach us a lesson. Our diplomatic credibility means nothing to them. She stood up, placing her hands flat on the table. Here's what's going to happen. We're going to give the Jathir one chance. 1. We're going to send them a message demanding the return of the Council's decision, offering to submit the matter to independent arbitration. When they refuse, and they will refuse, we respond with force. Chancellor, if we go to war with the Jathir, other Council species will intervene, Tanaka warned. This could spiral into a war against the entire galaxy. Then let it, Santos said, her voice cold. I will not abandon millions of our people because we're afraid. I will not teach our children that surrender is acceptable when faced with injustice. If the galaxy wants war, we'll give them war, and we'll show them that being young doesn't mean being weak. She looked at Chen. Admiral, you have authorization to mobilize the hidden fleet. Begin preparations for military action. But we do this smart. We hit them so hard and so fast they don't have time to respond. Can you do that? Chen nodded slowly. Yes, ma'am. I can do that. Then do it. And may God have mercy on us all because we're about to walk a path we can't turn back from. 3 days later, the Jathir fleet arrived at New Sarajevo. Governor Patricia Okafor watched from the planetary command center as the alien ships dropped out of FTL. There were hundreds of them, blotting out the stars. Each vessel was massive, dwarfing the 30 human defense ships that rose to meet them. Jathir fleet, this is New Sarajevo Command. Patricia broadcast on all channels. You are entering human sovereign space without authorization. Turn back immediately. The response came in Jakar's now familiar voice. Governor Okafor, by order of the Galactic Council. This world is now under Jathir administration. Stand down your defense forces. Resistance will be met with force. Patricia looked at Captain Maria Rodriguez, commander of the colony's defense flotilla. The younger woman's jaw was set, her eyes hard. Your orders, Governor? Maria asked quietly. Patricia thought about the 4.2 million people on her world. She thought about the families, the children, the dreams people had built here over 20 years of colonization. She thought about her own daughter, 7 years old, sleeping safely in their home 500 kilometers away. We don't surrender, Patricia said. Tell our ships to engage, and broadcast everything. I want Earth to see what happens here. I want the whole galaxy to see. The Battle of New Sarajevo lasted 4 hours. The human defense ships fought with desperate courage. They used every tactic in the book, every trick that smaller forces had ever used against larger ones. They targeted engines and weapon systems. They used the planet's gravity well for slingshot maneuvers. They died to a ship, taking dozens of Jathir vessels with them. But they died nonetheless. When the orbital defense platforms fell silent and the last human ship tumbled through space as a burning wreck, the Jathir fleet moved into bombardment position. Patricia stood in the command center, watching the tactical display as the alien ships began targeting population centers. Around her, her staff looked at her with terrified eyes. Evacuate, she ordered. Everyone to the bunkers now. Governor, you need to come too, her security chief said. Patricia shook her head. No, I'm broadcasting. The galaxy needs to witness this. She opened channels to every platform, every network, every communication system she could access, and then she spoke. Her voice steady even as the first kinetic strikes began hitting the planet. This is Governor Patricia Okafor of New Sarajevo. The Jathir Dominion is bombarding civilian population centers. They have defeated our military forces and now they're killing unarmed citizens. This is not warfare. This is murder. This is genocide, and the Galactic Council authorized it. The command center shook as strikes hit nearby. Dust fell from the ceiling. Alarm screamed. To anyone watching this, to every human in the galaxy, remember this moment. Remember that we asked for justice and received death. Remember that we followed their laws and they destroyed us anyway. Remember, and when Earth responds, understand why. We didn't start this war, but we will finish it. The final strike hit the command center 12 seconds later. Patricia Okafor died instantly, along with the 15 staff members who had refused to leave her. The bombardment of New Sarajevo continued for 18 hours. When it ended, 4.2 million people were dead. The Jathir landed occupation forces and began rounding up the few survivors. At Port Darwin and Stella Libre, the pattern repeated. Different governors, different defense forces, but the same result. The Jathir overwhelmed the defenders and bombarded the colonies from orbit. By the end of the week, 3 human worlds lay in ruins, and 4.7 million people were dead. The broadcasts reached Earth 7 hours after the first attack began. Chancellor Santos watched every minute of footage. She watched human ships die fighting impossible odds. She watched orbital strikes tear through cities. She watched Governor Okafor's final message, delivered with dignity even as death rained down around her. When the recordings ended, Santos sat in silence for a long moment. Then she stood and walked to her office window, looking out over the lights of Geneva. Admiral Chen entered quietly behind her. "The fleet is ready, ma'am. We can launch within the hour." "They killed 4.7 million people," Santos said softly. "Men, women, children. They didn't even try to minimize civilian casualties. They wanted to make an example of us." "Yes, ma'am." Santos turned to face him. Her eyes were dry, but something terrible burned in them. "No mercy, Admiral. You hit them with everything we have. You show them what humanity looks like when you murder our children. You make them regret they ever learned our name." "Understood," Chen said. "What about the Council?" "They'll try to interfere." "Let them try," Santos said coldly. "Any Council ship that gets between us and the Jathir becomes a valid target. They legitimized this slaughter. They voted for it. If they want to defend the Jathir, they can burn with them." Chen nodded and turned to leave, but Santos called him back. "Admiral, one more thing. When you broadcast your terms to the Jathir, I want you to mention Governor Okafor by name. I want them to know who they killed. I want them to understand that every single one of those 4.7 million people mattered to us. That we remember. That we will always remember." "I will, ma'am." After Chen left, Santos returned to the window. Somewhere in space, the hidden fleet was beginning to move. 2,000 warships built in secret, designed for exactly this moment. Ships that the Council didn't know existed. Ships that would shatter the Jathir dominion. And after that, after humanity revealed its true strength and took its revenge, that was when things would get truly dangerous. Because the Council wouldn't accept a humanity strong enough to challenge them. They would come with their combined fleets, with their ancient power, with their certainty that they could crush any upstart species. Santos thought about the long history of her species. Humans had faced extinction before. Ice ages, plagues, wars that nearly destroyed civilization. Every time they had survived. Every time they had come back stronger. The galaxy was about to learn that lesson. The hard way. In the darkness of space, Admiral Chen's flagship, the UES Retribution, powered up its weapon systems. Around it, 2,000 human warships did the same. They had been built in secret, crewed in secret, trained in secret for 20 years. Now their time had come. The Jathir Dominion had lit a fire when they murdered those colonies. They thought they were teaching humanity about power, about knowing their place in the galactic order. Instead, they had taught humanity something else entirely. They had taught them that the Council's laws were meaningless, that justice was an illusion, that the only thing that mattered in this galaxy was strength, and humanity was about to demonstrate just how strong they really were. The hidden fleet jumped to FTL, heading for the Jathir home system. The galaxy would never be the same. The Jathir homeworld of Kethral had not seen war in 3,000 years. It floated in space like a green jewel, protected by the most sophisticated defense network in the sector. Orbital platforms, minefields, automated defense stations, and a standing fleet of 400 warships made it one of the most fortified planets in known space. The Jathir people went about their lives in complete security. They had conquered dozens of worlds, subjugated numerous species, and served as one of the Council's primary military powers for millennia. They were untouchable. Everyone knew that. Which is why, when 2,000 human warships dropped out of FTL at the edge of the system, the response was first confusion, then disbelief, then raw terror. On the bridge of the UES Retribution, Admiral James Chen watched the tactical display update as his fleet sensors mapped the Jathir defenses. Beside him, Captain Sarah Park monitored the incoming communication attempts. The Jathir were transmitting constantly, demanding identification, threatening consequences, calling for council intervention. Chen ignored them all. He had been planning this moment for 15 years. Every simulation, every war game, every tactical study had led to this. The Jathir thought their homeworld was impregnable. They were about to learn otherwise. Status? He asked calmly. All ships in position, Park reported. Weapons systems charged. Strike packages ready. We're tracking the Jathir defense fleet. They're scrambling to form a defensive line between us and the planet. Let them, Chen said. Launch drones. What happened next had never been seen in galactic warfare. The Council species fought wars according to ancient traditions. Fleets met in open space. Ships exchanged fire at respectful distances. Battles were orchestrated, almost ceremonial. There were rules, protocols, civilized ways of conducting violence. Humanity had studied those rules carefully, then thrown them all away. 10,000 autonomous combat drones launched from the human fleet. Each one was the size of a fighter craft, packed with explosives and guided by artificial intelligence that the Council had banned 50 years ago as too destabilizing. The drones accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed and screamed toward the Jathir defense fleet. The Jathir ships opened fire, their weapons tracking and destroying hundreds of drones. But there were too many, moving too fast, using evasive patterns that no living pilot could match. The drones reached the defense fleet and detonated. In 15 minutes, the outer defense line ceased to exist. 300 Jathir warships, some of them centuries old, proud vessels with distinguished combat records, were reduced to expanding clouds of plasma and debris. On Kethral, alarms began to sound. High Commander Jacques stood in the Planetary Defense Center, staring at displays that made no sense. His fleet was gone. Simply gone. In a quarter of an hour, the humans had destroyed more ships than the Dominion had lost in the last 500 years. Get me the Council, he ordered. Tell them we're under attack. Tell them we need immediate assistance. His communications officer looked up, her scales pale with fear. Commander, we've been trying. The Council says they're dispatching peacekeepers, but it will take days for them to arrive. We don't have days, Jacques roared. We have hours at best. On the Retribution, Admiral Chen received the first reports from his intelligence teams. The Jathir were calling for help. Good. Let them. Let the Council scramble. By the time anyone arrived, the lesson would already be taught. Begin Operation Sledgehammer, Chen ordered. The human fleet split into 3 groups. Each group targeted a different section of Kethral's orbital defenses. They didn't approach slowly or cautiously. They burned at maximum acceleration, weapons firing continuously, overwhelming the automated defenses through sheer volume of fire. The Jathir military had never faced an enemy that fought like this. Human ships took damage that would have forced Council vessels to retreat and kept fighting. Human captains made suicide runs to take out key installations. Human tactics were brutal, efficient, and terrifyingly effective. In 2 hours, the orbital defenses were silent. Chen opened a channel to the planet's surface. He made sure it was broadcast on every frequency, received by every device on Kethral. When he spoke, his voice was cold and empty of emotion. This is Admiral James Chen of the United Earth Forces. 3 days ago, your Dominion attacked 3 human colonies. You murdered 4.7 million people. Men, women, and children who had done nothing to you. You killed them because you thought you could, because you thought we were weak, because you thought there would be no consequences. He paused, letting his words sink in. Across Kethral, billions of Jathir were listening, their world's invincible defenses now just wreckage in orbit above them. You were wrong. You have 24 hours to surrender every human survivor from those colonies, every single person you took. Return them unharmed and we will accept your surrender. Refuse and we will demonstrate what humanity looks like when you murder our children. This is your only warning. This is your only chance. Chen closed the channel and looked at his officers. Maintain blockade positions. Nothing leaves this planet. Nothing comes in. If the Jathir try to evacuate their leadership or move military assets, we destroy them. Captain Park hesitated. Sir, the Council is already calling this an illegal military action. High Arbiter Q then has demanded we withdraw immediately. Let him demand, Chen said flatly. He voted to authorize the destruction of our colonies. He legitimized what the Jathir did. As far as I'm concerned, the Council lost any moral authority when they ignored our evidence and sided with murderers. The 24 hours passed slowly. On Kethril, the government debated. Some wanted to surrender, to give back the human survivors and hope for mercy. Others, led by Councillor Jakar himself, insisted that weakness would destroy them. The Council would intervene. Humanity couldn't sustain this aggression. They just needed to hold out. Jakar made one final broadcast to his people. The humans are primitives throwing a tantrum. They lack the strength to truly threaten us. The Council will restore order. We need only wait. Admiral Chen received the message and smiled grimly. They chose war. Very well. Commence bombardment. But the human bombardment was nothing like what the Jathir had done to the colonies. Chen had no interest in killing civilians. Instead, his ships targeted military installations, weapons factories, naval shipyards, and government buildings. The strikes were precise, surgical, devastating to the Dominion's military infrastructure but carefully avoiding population centers. In 12 hours, the Jathir Dominion's military capability ceased to exist. Every shipyard was slag. Every weapons depot was destroyed. Every command and control center was reduced to rubble. And through it all, Admiral Chen broadcast a running commentary, explaining exactly what was being destroyed and why. This is the price of murdering our people, he said as another shipyard erupted in flames. This is what happens when you think there are no consequences. You wanted to teach us a lesson. Consider this lesson learned. After the bombardment ended, Chen sent a second message to the Jathir government. This time his terms were harsher. You had your chance. You chose to believe we were bluffing. Now you have 12 hours to surrender unconditionally. Every member of your government who voted for the attack on our colonies will be turned over for trial. All human survivors will be returned. Your military will be disbanded. These terms are non-negotiable. Accept them, or we reduce your homeworld to a pre-industrial state. Your choice. On Kethril, in the emergency bunker where the Dominion's leadership had gathered, High Commander Jaketh looked at Councillor Jakar with undisguised hatred. You said they were weak, Jaketh hissed. You said they couldn't fight. Our fleet is destroyed, our defenses are gone, and 2,000 human warships orbit our world. Where did they even come from? Intelligence said they only had 300 ships. Jakar's scales had lost their luster. He looked old suddenly and frightened. I don't understand. They shouldn't have this capability. It's not possible. It's very possible, Jaketh said bitterly. They lied. They hid their strength while we assumed they were harmless. And now we're going to pay the price for your arrogance. The Council will never allow this, Jakar insisted. They're already mobilizing fleets. The Council is 3 weeks away, Jaketh said. The humans are here now. And unless you want to see our entire civilization reduced to ashes, we surrender. Immediately. The debate raged for hours, but in the end, survival won out over pride. The Jathir Dominion transmitted its unconditional surrender. The footage of that surrender broadcast across the galaxy. Every Council species watched as the proud Jathir, who had dominated their region of space for millennia, bent their knee to a species that had been spacefaring for barely 2 decades. In the Council chambers on Zenith Prime, the emergency session was already underway. High Arbiter Q then's voice was sharp with anger. The humans have committed an act of war against a Council member species. This aggression cannot stand. We must respond with overwhelming force. Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood in the center of the chamber. She had returned from Earth specifically for this moment. Her expression was cold, her voice colder. The Galactic Council authorized the Jathir attack on our colonies. You voted for it. You ignored our evidence and sided with fabricated lies. 4.7 million humans are dead because of your decision. And now you have the audacity to call our response aggression? The matter was handled through proper legal channels, Q then said stiffly. The Jathir's claims were validated by the Technical Committee. The Technical Committee you control, Elena shot back. Let me show you something, High Arbiter. Something every human in the galaxy has now seen. She activated her display, and Governor Okafor's final broadcast played in the chamber. The council members watched as the Jathir bombarded civilian centers. They watched as a brave woman faced death with dignity while condemning them for their complicity. When it ended, Elena looked around the chamber. You legitimized that. You voted for it, and now you're shocked that we responded? You're outraged that we defended ourselves? There are proper channels for disputes, Q then insisted, but his voice lacked its usual certainty. We tried proper channels. We presented evidence. You ignored it. You taught us that your laws, your protocols, your civilization means nothing when it comes to protecting the powerful. So we'll use the only language you understand. Force. Councillor Venar, the crystalline being who had questioned the vote before, spoke up. Ambassador Vasquez, surely you understand that this action will have consequences. The Council cannot allow one species to attack another with impunity. Then perhaps the Council should have thought about that before authorizing the Jathir to murder millions of our people, Elena said. You want consequences? Here they are. The Jathir Dominion is broken. Their fleet is destroyed. Their military infrastructure is gone. And we have 2,000 warships that you didn't know existed. Ships that are more advanced than you expected, crewed by people who are now very, very motivated to ensure this never happens again. This is exactly the kind of dangerous behavior we warned about when debating human membership, another counselor said. You're proving that your species is too aggressive, too unpredictable to be trusted. Elena laughed, a harsh sound. Aggressive? Unpredictable? You murdered 4.7 million of our people, and you call us aggressive for responding. Let me tell you what's really happening here. You're scared. For 12,000 years you've run this galaxy according to your rules, secure in your power, and now you've discovered that humanity is strong enough to challenge you. That terrifies you. She walked slowly around the center floor, meeting the eyes of various counselors. Here's what's going to happen. The Jathir will face justice for their war crimes. Every human survivor will be returned. And the Galactic Council is going to pass a resolution making it clear that no species can be targeted for correction or lessons ever again. Those are our terms. And if we refuse? Ku then asked. Elena's smile was cold. Then you'll discover that the fleet currently occupying Kethral isn't our only surprise. We've been studying you for 20 years. Every species in this council. Your tactics, your weaknesses, your standard operating procedures. We've designed our entire military specifically to fight you. So by all means, refuse. Send your fleets. We'll see how 12,000 years of civilized warfare fares against a species that learned combat in the mud and blood of Earth. The chamber erupted. Some species called for immediate military action. Others urged caution. A few, the younger species who remembered being powerless, stayed silent, but watched with something like satisfaction. High Arbiter. Q then called for order. The Council will vote on a resolution to censure humanity and authorize joint military action to restore order. All those in favor? This time the vote was different. 38 species voted in favor, 9 opposed, but several species abstained, which had never happened in a vote of this importance. The resolution passes, Q then declared. Humanity is hereby censured and Council forces are authorized to restore order by any means necessary. Elena nodded slowly. So be it, you've chosen war. I hope you're prepared for what comes next. Because humanity certainly is. She walked out of the chamber. Behind her, the Council erupted again in debate. Species were already forming coalitions, committing ships, preparing for what they assumed would be a short, sharp lesson to teach the upstart humans their place. Elena made her way back to her ship. Marcus Chen was waiting, his face pale. Ambassador, the Council just declared war on us. I know, Elena said calmly. Contact Admiral Chen, tell him to prepare for Phase 2. Phase 2? Marcus asked. I thought the Jathir operation was the only plan. Elena looked at him. Marcus, we've been preparing for this for 15 years. Did you really think we stopped at one fleet? That we didn't plan for what happens when the Council inevitably turns against us? She pulled up a classified file on her datapad and showed it to him. His eyes went wide as he read the contents. Oh my God, he whispered. How many ships do we actually have? Enough, Elena said. More than enough. The Council thinks they know us. They think we're emotional, reckless, easy to predict. They're about to learn otherwise. As her ship left Zenith Prime Station, Elena looked back at the massive structure. She thought about all the time she had walked those corridors, endured the casual contempt of species who thought humanity was beneath them, swallowed her pride for the sake of diplomacy. Those days were over. The mask was off. Humanity stood revealed, armed, and angry, and the galaxy was about to learn what happens when you push too far. On Earth, Chancellor Santos received Elena's report and immediately convened her war cabinet. Admiral Chen's face appeared on the main display, transmitting from the Retribution. "They took the bait," Chen said with grim satisfaction. 38 species are committing to military action. They're forming a coalition fleet. Estimated strength, over 50,000 ships. Can we handle that? Santos asked. Yes, Chen said simply. They still think they know what we're capable of. They don't. When they committed to this vote, they made the single biggest tactical mistake in galactic history. They're gathering their forces in predictable staging areas. They're using standard council military protocols. And they think we only have 2,000 ships. How many do we actually have, Admiral? Chen's expression was hard. Including reserves, emergency production, and the ships we've been building since the Jathir attack? 5,000 warships, another 10,000 support vessels, and enough weapons to fight a war for the next 10 years if necessary. Santos leaned back in her chair. Then let's make sure it doesn't take that long. Proceed with your plan, Admiral. Show them what happens when they declare war on humanity. Around the table, Earth's leadership nodded. They had all seen the broadcasts from the colonies. They had all watched Governor Okafor die. They had all received messages from grieving families, from survivors demanding justice, from citizens calling for retribution. The Council wanted to restore order, to put humanity back in its place. Instead, they were about to discover that they had awakened something they couldn't control. Humanity wasn't fighting for territory or resources or political advantage. They were fighting for something far more dangerous. The belief that their people mattered, that their sovereignty was real, that they would never again bow to beings who saw them as less than equal. The Council had spent 12,000 years building a galaxy based on hierarchy, tradition, and the power of ancient civilizations. Humanity was about to tear that galaxy down and rebuild it according to a very different philosophy. One based on a simple principle: that any species strong enough to fight for their freedom deserves to be free. The war was just beginning, and the galaxy would never be the same. The Council's coalition fleet assembled at Rally Point Sigma, a massive staging area in neutral space. 53,000 ships from 38 different species gathered in formations that stretched across millions of kilometers. It was the largest military force assembled in 8,000 years, and its commanders were confident of quick victory. Grand Admiral Thelkor of the Verath Supremacy commanded the coalition. His species had been part of the Council for 9,000 years and had fought in every major conflict during that time. He stood on his flagship's bridge, watching the tactical displays with satisfaction. Status report, he ordered. His operations officer, a six-limbed being from the Hexen Collective, manipulated the displays. All fleet elements in position, Grand Admiral. We have confirmed locations for 17 human colony worlds and their naval base at Proxima Station. Intelligence suggests the humans can field no more than 3,000 ships, and half of those are already committed to occupying Jathir space. Then we have them outnumbered 17-1, Thelkor said. This should be over quickly. His second-in-command, a veteran named Vorath, looked less certain. Grand Admiral, the humans defeated the Jathir fleet in a matter of hours. They destroyed defenses that had stood for 3,000 years. Should we not be more cautious? The Jathir were overconfident and unprepared, Thelkor replied. We will not make the same mistake. Our fleet is diverse, our tactics proven over millennia. The humans may have surprised the Jathir, but they cannot surprise us. He was wrong. The attack came at Oro 400 Standard Time, when the Council fleet's crew rotations were at their minimum efficiency. It didn't come from the direction of human space. It came from 7 different vectors simultaneously, ships dropping out of FTL in formations that should have been impossible to coordinate. Contact, the sensor officer shouted. Multiple FTL signatures, all vectors, distance varying from 20,000 to 500,000 kilometers. How many? Thelkor demanded. The sensor officer's voice went flat with shock. I'm reading. 4,700 human signatures. Grand Admiral, that's more ships than intelligence said they had in total. Thelkor felt ice settle in his stomach. Battle stations. All ships assume defensive formations. But the Council fleet was designed for traditional warfare. Their ships were arranged in ceremonial groupings, organized by species and political bloc. They assumed they would have time to detect an approaching enemy and form proper battle lines. The humans gave them no time. The first wave hit the outer edges of the Council fleet. Human ships came in fast, weapons already firing, launching those terrifying autonomous drones that the Council had never developed because they seemed too dangerous, too unpredictable. The drones swarmed Council vessels, overwhelming point defenses through sheer numbers. What shocked the Council commanders even more was the diversity of human tactics. Some ships fought at long range, using missiles that tracked targets with unnerving accuracy. Others closed to point-blank range, trading fire in brutal exchanges that Council doctrine said were suicidal. Still others used electronic warfare that blinded sensors and disrupted communications. The Council fleet outnumbered the humans 10-1. It didn't matter. The humans had studied every species' combat doctrines, every standard tactic, every predictable response. They hit weaknesses the Council didn't know they had. Admiral Chen watched the battle unfold from the Retribution. His fleet had been divided into 7 strike groups, each one targeting a different section of the Council formation. The goal wasn't to destroy the entire enemy fleet. That would take weeks and cost too many lives. The goal was to break their will. Strike Group 3 reports they've broken through the Vareth lines, Captain Park reported. Strike Group 5 is engaging the Corvin cluster. Good, Chen said. Have Group 6 proceed to Phase 2. Target their command ships. What happened next would be talked about in military academies for generations. Human ships pushed deep into the Council formation, ignoring the smaller vessels, focusing entirely on flagships and command vessels. They used intelligence gathered over 20 years to identify which ships housed fleet commanders, which vessels controlled communications networks, which platforms coordinated defensive fire, and they destroyed them with ruthless efficiency. Grand Admiral Thelkor watched his carefully organized fleet descend into chaos. Communications were breaking down. Fleet elements were losing coordination. Individual ships were fighting well, but as a unified force, the coalition was falling apart. We need to withdraw, Vorath said urgently. Regroup at a safe distance and reorganize. If we retreat now, we lose all credibility, Thelkor said. We have the numbers. We just need to... A human ship materialized on their starboard side, impossibly close. It must have jumped directly into the engagement zone, a maneuver that was considered reckless to the point of insanity. The human vessel opened fire at point-blank range, its weapons tearing through the flagship's shields. Damage report, Thelkor shouted over the alarms. Forward shields collapsed. Hull breaches on decks 7 through 12. We're venting atmosphere. The human ship could have finished them. Instead, it transmitted a message directly to Thelkor's command channel. The voice was calm, almost friendly. Grand Admiral Thelkor, this is Captain Sarah Park of the UES Retribution. Your flagship is crippled. Your fleet is in disarray. You can continue this engagement and watch more of your people die, or you can order a general retreat. Your choice. You have 60 seconds to decide. Thelkor looked at his tactical display. In the 6 hours since the battle began, the Council had lost over 8,000 ships. The humans had lost perhaps 300. The mathematics were brutal and undeniable. Signal general retreat, he said quietly. The Battle of Rally Point Sigma ended with the Council's coalition fleet scattering in every direction. Human forces pursued for a time, destroying ships that were slow to disengage, then pulled back to consolidate their own formations. Admiral Chen broadcast his message to the retreating Council forces. This didn't have to happen. You could have listened. You could have acknowledged that what the Jathir did was wrong. Instead, you chose to defend them. You chose to punish us for defending ourselves. Remember this moment. Remember that we offered peace and you demanded war. What comes next is on you. The battle made waves across the galaxy. Species that had remained neutral suddenly questioned whether supporting the Council was wise. Some of the coalition members began sending quiet diplomatic feelers to Earth, asking about terms for withdrawal. On Zenith Prime, the emergency sessions continued around the clock. High Arbiter K'Then looked older now, his movement slower. The certainty that had always characterized his leadership was gone. We underestimated them, Counselor Venar said simply. They let us believe they were weak, while building strength in secret. Now they've proven they can defeat our combined forces. We need to reassess. Reassess what? Another counselor demanded. They're primitives, They've been in space for barely a generation. We have civilizations that predate their written language. And yet they're winning, Venar said flatly. Pride won't change that fact. The debate raged, but outside the chambers, the galaxy was already changing. Human ships were appearing in systems that had never seen them before. They weren't attacking, just showing up, making their presence known. The message was clear. Humanity could reach any world they wanted, and there was nothing the Council could do to stop them. On Earth, Chancellor Santos met with her advisory council. The news from Rally Point Sigma had reached them hours ago, and the reports were better than anyone had dared hope. "We won," Admiral Chen said, his face appearing on the display from his flagship. "Decisively. But this isn't over. The Council still has millions of ships across the galaxy. We hurt them, but we haven't beaten them." "What do you need?" Santos asked. "Time and resources," Chen replied. "Time to repair our damaged ships, resources to replace our losses, and we need to press our advantage. The Council is off balance. Some species are already questioning whether they should keep fighting. If we can drive that wedge deeper, we might end this without having to defeat the entire galaxy in combat. How do we do that?" "We show them what we're really fighting for," Chen said. "We're not trying to conquer anyone. We're not interested in building an empire. We just want to be left alone to live our lives." That message resonates with a lot of younger species in the Council. They've been dominated by the ancient civilizations for millennia. They see in us a chance for change. Santos nodded slowly. "I'll have Elena focus on diplomatic outreach. See if we can peel off some of the coalition members. But Admiral, I need your honest assessment. Can we sustain this? Fighting a war against 38 species?" Chen was silent for a moment. "It's going to cost us. We've already lost 70,000 people in the battle so far. We'll lose more before this ends. Our economy is fully mobilized for war production, which means shortages of civilian goods. But can we sustain it? Yes. The question is whether the Council can. They've never fought a war like this. Their societies aren't organized for extended conflict. They're used to quick, decisive actions followed by peace. We're showing them what a real war looks like, and I don't think they have the stomach for it." Over the following months, the pattern Chen predicted began to emerge. Human forces won battle after battle, not through overwhelming numbers, but through superior tactics, better coordination, and a willingness to take risks that Council commanders considered insane. The Battle of Corvus Nebula saw human ships use the dense gas clouds as cover, emerging to strike at Council formations before disappearing again. Traditional tactics said fighting in a nebula was too dangerous, too unpredictable. Human captains used that assumption against their enemies. The Siege of Archon, the Council's primary military fortress in the outer sectors, lasted 3 days. The fortress had stood for 6,000 years, its defenses upgraded and perfected over millennia. Human forces bypassed the primary defenses entirely, landed troops on the surface through a gap in the shield coverage that no one had thought was exploitable, and captured the command center before the garrison could mount an effective defense. With each victory, more Council species began to question the war. The Corvin Assembly was the first to officially withdraw from the coalition, declaring that the conflict was not in their strategic interests. 3 other species followed within a week. But the cost was mounting on all sides. 11 human colonies were bombarded by Council forces in retaliatory strikes. Millions died. Human forces responded by hitting military targets across 50 systems, destroying shipyards, weapons factories, and naval bases. The galaxy was learning what total war meant. Not the ritualized combat that the Council preferred, but something brutal and absolute. The kind of war where every ship, every weapon, every resource was committed to victory, because defeat meant extinction. Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of the Retribution, looking at casualty reports. They had lost another 17 ships in the last engagement. 5,000 crew members dead. Each one of them was a person with a name, a family, a life that had been cut short. Captain Park approached him quietly. "Admiral, we're receiving reports that High Arbiter Q then is calling for another Council session. They want to discuss peace terms." "Terms?" Chen asked. or surrender. The message wasn't clear, but there's movement in the Council. Some species are refusing to commit more ships. Others are calling for K'then to step down. The unity they had at the beginning is fracturing. Chen nodded. He was tired. They were all tired. The war had been going on for 18 months now, and while humanity was winning, the cost was staggering. Every day brought news of more casualties, more ships lost, more families destroyed. "Contact Ambassador Vasquez," he said. "Tell her it might be time for diplomacy again. But make it clear, we're not going back to the way things were. The Council needs to understand that humanity is not going to accept second-class status anymore." In her quarters on the diplomatic vessel approaching Zenith Prime, Elena received Chen's message. She had been preparing for this moment. The war was winnable, but winning through total military victory would mean years more of fighting, millions more dead on all sides. If there was a chance for peace, she had to take it. But she also knew that the Council would try to save face. They would try to paint this as a mutual agreement, a compromise that maintained their authority. She couldn't allow that. The galaxy needed to understand that the old order was gone, that humanity had shattered it and something new was being born from the pieces. She drafted her response to Chen, then prepared her statement for the Council. When she walked into those chambers again, it wouldn't be as a supplicant begging for justice. It would be as the representative of a power that had proven it could challenge the galaxy and win. The war had taught humanity a terrible lesson, that sometimes violence was the only language that power understood. But it had also taught the galaxy something, that being young didn't mean being weak, that being new didn't mean being inferior, and that any species pushed far enough would fight back with everything they had. High Arbiter Q then was about to learn those lessons personally, and in the Council chambers where it all began, where human sovereignty had been voted away like it meant nothing, the reckoning was coming. The galaxy was learning fear, and in that fear perhaps there was finally a foundation for real peace. Not the peace of dominated species accepting their place, but the peace of equals who had learned to respect each other's strength. Admiral Chen looked out at the stars from his flagship's observation deck. Somewhere out there, Earth floated in space. Home, the planet that had given birth to his species, with all its flaws in violence and beauty. They had come so far from that small blue world, they had reached the stars, met other species, joined an ancient galactic community. And when that community had tried to crush them, they had fought back and won, but at what cost? And what kind of galaxy would emerge from this war? Those were questions for diplomats and politicians. Chen was a soldier. His job was to ensure that humanity survived, that they had the strength to protect their freedom. Looking at his reflection in the viewport, Chen barely recognized himself. The war had aged him, changed him, made him harder, colder. He had ordered attacks that killed millions. He had sacrificed ships and crews when it was necessary. He had become the kind of commander that won wars at any price. Was that what humanity needed? Warriors who would do whatever it took to survive? Or would that transformation into something harder, something more ruthless, mean losing the very humanity they fought to protect? He didn't know. But he knew that the choice had been made the moment the Jathir bombarded those colonies, the moment the Council voted to legitimize murder, the moment they taught humanity that in this galaxy, only strength mattered. Humanity had learned that lesson well, perhaps too well, and now the galaxy would live with the consequences. The war continued. 18 months after the war began, the human fleet returned to Zenith Prime Station, not to attack, though the Council feared that possibility. They came for something far more important than destruction. They came for justice. 5,000 human warships took up positions around the massive orbital structure. Their weapons were powered but not armed. Their shields were up but not at combat strength. It was a show of force without immediate threat, a reminder that humanity could destroy the Council's headquarters but chose not to. Inside her diplomatic vessel, Ambassador Elena Vasquez reviewed her notes one final time. She had spent 18 months watching the war from various locations, sometimes from Earth, coordinating diplomatic efforts, sometimes from Admiral Chen's fleet, witnessing the battles firsthand. She had seen the cost of this conflict on both sides. Now she would see if that cost had been enough to change anything. Marcus Chen, her assistant, entered the cabin. He had aged visibly during the war. They all had. Ambassador, the Council has agreed to an emergency session. All 47 species will be represented. They've even recalled some of the founding members who rarely attend in person anymore. Good, Elena said. That means they're taking this seriously. Are you sure about this approach? Marcus asked. We've won the military conflict. We could dictate terms. Instead, you're giving them a chance to negotiate. Elena looked at him. Marcus, we didn't fight this war to become conquerors. We fought it because they took 3 of our worlds and murdered millions of our people. We fought it because they taught us that their laws were meaningless when applied to us. Now we need to make sure that never happens again. Not just for humanity, but for every species in the galaxy. You really think you can reform the Council? No, Elena said simply. I think we can destroy it and build something better from the pieces. But first, they need to understand what they did wrong. Really understand it. Not just accept it because we have guns pointed at them. The council chamber looked the same as it had 2 years ago, when Elena had stood here and watched her colonies being voted away. The same seats arranged in their ancient hierarchy. The same platform where High Arbiter Quthen presided. But the atmosphere was completely different. Fear. That was what Elena sensed as she walked to the center floor. For 12,000 years, these chambers had been the center of galactic power. The beings here had made decisions that affected trillions of lives across thousands of worlds. They had never been challenged, never been threatened, never been forced to question their own authority. Now outside their windows, 5,000 human warships waited, and inside their chambers, a human ambassador walked with the confidence of someone representing a power that could reduce this entire station to atoms if they chose. High Arbiter. Quthen looked older. The war had taken its toll on him as well. His species could live for centuries, but stress aged them nonetheless. When he spoke, his voice lacked the absolute certainty it had once carried. Ambassador Vasquez, the Council has agreed to this session as a gesture of goodwill. We hope that peaceful resolution can still be achieved. Elena almost laughed. Goodwill. As if they were doing her a favor by meeting. As if 5,000 warships had nothing to do with their willingness to talk. High Arbiter, I'm not here for goodwill. I'm here for justice. For the 4.7 million humans who died because this council authorized their murder. For the millions more who have died in the war that followed. I'm here to make sure that what happened to us never happens to any species again. She activated her display, and images filled the chamber. Not military data or battle recordings this time. Images of people. Human civilians from the 3 destroyed colonies. A family sitting for a portrait. Children playing in a park. An elderly couple celebrating their anniversary. These are the people who died, Elena said. Each one of them had a name, a life, dreams for the future. They weren't soldiers. They weren't politicians. They were just people living their lives. And you voted to let the Jathir kill them. The chamber was silent. Many counselors looked away from the images. Others stared, perhaps seeing for the first time the reality of what they had authorized. Elena continued. We have evidence now. Evidence that the Jathir fabricated their claims with assistance from certain council members. Evidence that this was a coordinated effort to teach humanity a lesson about knowing our place. Evidence that High Arbiter Quthen personally approved the plan. Quthen's mandibles clicked rapidly. That is a serious accusation. It's the truth, Elena said flatly. And I can prove it. She uploaded files to the council's central system. Communications between Jakar and other counselors. Technical committee reports showing how they falsified the navigation data. And most damning of all, a recording of a private conversation between Quthen and 3 other senior counselors where they discussed using the Jathir incident to remind the younger species of their place. The chamber erupted. Counselors shouted at each other, at Quthen, at Elena. Some demanded to know where she got the recordings. Others called for Quthen's immediate removal. Still others insisted this was human propaganda. Elena waited for the chaos to die down. When it didn't, she simply raised her voice. Enough. The word echoed through the chamber with unexpected force. Elena rarely shouted, and the shock of it brought silence. You want to know where I got those recordings? From your own systems. We've had access to council networks for months. While you were busy fighting a war, we were gathering evidence of your crimes. Because unlike you, we actually care about justice. We care about truth, and we're not going to let you sweep this under the rug." Admiral James Chen entered the chamber at that moment. It was unprecedented for military personnel to enter during a council session, but no one tried to stop him. He walked to stand beside Elena, his dress uniform spotless, his bearing that of a man who had commanded forces in 100 battles. "High Arbiter Q then," Chen said, his voice carrying through the chamber. "You are hereby charged with conspiracy to commit genocide, falsification of legal evidence, and abuse of authority. 14 other counselors are charged as co-conspirators. Under Galactic law, which you claim to uphold, these crimes carry a mandatory sentence of removal from office and criminal trial." Kithen's voice was barely a whisper through the translator. "You cannot charge me. I am the High Arbiter." "You were the High Arbiter," Chen corrected. "You lost that title when you authorized murder. When you conspired to destroy innocent people because you wanted to maintain your power, you're not a leader anymore. You're a war criminal." Counselor Vaynar stood. The crystalline being's voice was calm but firm. "The human presents a valid legal case. High Arbiter. Then you are hereby suspended from your duties pending investigation. The evidence will be reviewed by an independent committee." "Who will serve on this committee?" another counselor demanded. "We cannot trust the humans to judge this fairly." "Then we'll have representatives from neutral species," Elena said. "Species that weren't part of the coalition against us. Species that have no stake in the outcome. And we'll make the proceedings public. Every being in the galaxy can watch and judge for themselves." The debate that followed lasted for hours, but in the end, the weight of evidence was too great. Q then was removed from his position. 14 other counselors were suspended. The trials would begin within a month, but Elena wasn't finished. "The council has a choice to make," she said as the session prepared to adjourn. "You can continue as you have for 12,000 years. With the ancient species at the top and everyone else learning their place. Or you can reform. You can create a system where every species, regardless of age or power, has an equal voice, where justice actually means something, where laws apply to everyone, not just the convenient targets." "And if we refuse?" a counselor asked. Elena looked directly at them. "Then humanity withdraws from the council. We take our fleet, our technology, our resources, and we leave. And every other species that's tired of being dominated by the old guard, they'll leave too. We'll form our own alliance, our own government, and you'll be left with your ancient traditions and diminishing relevance while the rest of the galaxy moves forward without you." The threat hung in the air. It wasn't an idle one. Elena knew that at least 20 species had already approached Earth about forming an alternative to the Council. Younger civilizations, species that had been members for less than 5,000 years, all of them tired of being treated as inferior. "You're threatening to split the galaxy," Q then said, though his authority was gone. "I'm offering you a chance to evolve," Elena corrected. "The galaxy is changing whether you like it or not. Humanity proved that age doesn't equal superiority. That tradition doesn't trump justice. You can adapt to that reality, or you can cling to the past and become irrelevant. Your choice." The council adjourned without a decision. But over the following weeks, the debate raged across the galaxy. Species held internal discussions about what they wanted from galactic governance. The trials of Q then and the other conspirators were broadcast live, and billions of beings watched as the evidence was laid out. The recordings were damning. The conspiracy was real. The Council's most senior leadership had authorized the destruction of human colonies as a political move to maintain the established order. They had murdered millions of people not because those people had done anything wrong, but because they represented a challenge to the way things had always been. The verdicts came down after 3 weeks of testimony. Guilty on all charges. Kuthen and the 14 other counselors were stripped of all authority and sentenced to exile on penal colonies. It was as close to justice as the council system allowed, but the real change was happening outside the courtrooms. Species were withdrawing from the old power blocks. New alliances were forming. The council structure that had existed for 12 millennia was crumbling, and something new was being born. Elena stood in the council chamber 2 months after the trials ended. The session today would determine the galaxy's future. A vote on complete restructuring of the council. Equal representation for all species. Unanimous consent required for military action. Protections for sovereignty that couldn't be overridden by political maneuvering. The vote was called. Elena watched as species after species voted in favor. Not all of them, not immediately. Some of the oldest civilizations refused, clinging to their traditional power, but enough voted yes, enough to fundamentally change how the council operated. The reforms passed, not by a landslide, but by enough that they would take effect. The galaxy would never be the same. After the vote, Elena walked through the corridors of Zenith Prime one last time. She thought about the first time she had walked these halls, fresh and hopeful, believing that justice and reason would protect humanity. She thought about standing in this chamber as her colonies were voted away, powerless to stop it. She thought about Governor Okafor dying with dignity while her world burned. About Admiral Chen's transformation from a defensive strategist to a wartime commander who had ordered strikes that killed millions. About Chancellor Santos making the decision to go to war despite knowing the cost. About the 70,000 humans who had died in the fighting, and the millions more across dozens of species. All of that pain, all of that loss, for what? So that the Council could learn a lesson it should have known from the beginning, that all sapient beings deserve respect, regardless of how long they've been traveling between stars. Admiral Chen joined her in the corridor. He looked tired. They both did. Was it worth it? He asked quietly. Elena considered the question. I don't know, we won. We changed the galaxy. We made sure this can never happen to another species. But the cost? James, we became something dark during this war. We did things that will haunt us forever. We did what we had to do to survive, Chen said, did we? Or did we do more than that? Did we cross lines that should never be crossed? Chen was silent for a long moment. I killed millions of people, Elena. Military targets, yes, but still people with families and lives. I ordered strikes that destroyed entire cities' worth of military infrastructure, and I didn't lose sleep over it because I told myself it was necessary. Was I right? Or did I become the very thing we were fighting against? Elena put her hand on his shoulder. I think we'll be asking ourselves that question for the rest of our lives. But I also think we did what we had to do. Not because we wanted power or revenge, but because if we hadn't fought, humanity would have been destroyed. Slowly, methodically, colony by colony, until we had nothing left. The Council wouldn't have gone that far, Chen said, but he didn't sound certain. Wouldn't they? They voted to hand over 3 of our worlds based on lies. They authorized the Jathir to do whatever they wanted with our people. If we had rolled over, if we had accepted that, do you really think they would have stopped? Or would they have seen weakness and pushed further? Chen nodded slowly. You're probably right. But that doesn't make what we did feel any better. They walked together toward the docking bay where their ships waited. Behind them, the council chamber was already filling with representatives again. The galaxy's business continued. Treaties were being signed, trade agreements negotiated, disputes mediated. Life went on, but it was a different life now in a different galaxy. One where humanity had proven it wouldn't be pushed around. One where other species looked at humans with a mixture of respect and fear. One where the old certainties were gone, replaced by something more chaotic but potentially more just. On Earth, Chancellor Santos received Elena's final report. The war was over. The reforms were in place. Humanity had achieved everything they set out to accomplish and more. But Santos felt no triumph as she read the casualty figures. 70,000 dead in combat. Another 200,000 wounded. 11 colonies damaged, requiring decades to rebuild. And that didn't count the psychological cost. An entire generation of humans had grown up during the war. They had learned that the galaxy was dangerous, that other species couldn't be trusted, that survival required strength and the willingness to use it. What kind of civilization would they build with those lessons? What kind of future was humanity creating? Santos didn't know, but she knew that there was no going back. Humanity had changed fundamentally during this war. They had learned what they were capable of when pushed too far. They had discovered that they could fight and win against impossible odds. That knowledge was both empowering and terrifying. In the years that followed, humanity would become one of the Council's most influential species. Not through domination or conquest, but through the simple fact that everyone remembered what happened when you pushed them too far. They were respected, feared, and left alone to chart their own course. Other species, encouraged by humanity's example, began asserting their own independence. The younger civilizations formed their own bloc within the reformed council, pushing for changes that would have been unthinkable before the war. The galaxy was entering a new era, one born from violence and loss, but perhaps leading to something better. A galaxy where power didn't automatically grant the right to rule, where justice meant more than political convenience, where every species, regardless of age or strength, had a voice. Elena Vasquez retired from diplomatic service 2 years after the war ended. She returned to Earth, to a small house in the mountains where she could see the stars at night. She would sit on her porch and look up at those distant lights, thinking about all the worlds up there, all the beings trying to build lives across the infinite dark. Sometimes she wondered if they had done the right thing, if there had been another way, if the cost had been too high. But then she would remember Governor Okafor's final broadcast. That brave woman staring death in the face and demanding that the galaxy remember what had been done, demanding that humanity not let her death be meaningless. They had remembered, and they had made sure the galaxy would never forget. In the council chambers on Zenith Prime, a new High Arbiter presided over the reformed government. They were from a younger species, elected by vote rather than appointed by tradition. It was a symbolic change, but an important one. On the wall behind the Arbiter's platform, a new inscription had been added. It was written in every language known to the Council, but the words were originally human. A quote from Chancellor Santos during the negotiations that ended the war. "Never mistake patience for weakness. Never assume that youth means inferiority. And never forget that justice delayed is justice denied. These lessons were written in the blood of millions. May we never need to learn them again." Below that, another inscription. The names of the 3 human colonies that had been destroyed. New Sarajevo, Port Darwin, Stella Libre. A reminder of where it all began, of the price of arrogance and the cost of injustice. And at the very bottom, one final line. A warning and a promise. Humanity doesn't surrender its people. Those words would echo through the ages. They would become a warning that every species in the galaxy learned to respect. They would be taught to children of a dozen civilizations as an example of what happens when powerful beings forget that others have strength too. The war that began with a vote in these chambers had ended with those same chambers transformed. The Council would never again be what it was. It had been broken and rebuilt, and in the rebuilding perhaps something better had emerged, or perhaps not. Time would tell. History would judge. But for now, in the quiet aftermath of violence in the chambers where it all began, there was at least the possibility of real change. The possibility that the pain and loss hadn't been for nothing. The possibility that the galaxy might finally learn to treat all its children with equal respect. Elena sat on her porch looking at the stars and allowed herself to hope. Just a little. Just enough. Because in the end, hope was all any species had. Hope that tomorrow might be better than today. Hope that the sacrifices made would lead to something worthwhile. Hope that the galaxy, vast and ancient and often cruel, might still have room for justice. It wasn't much, but it was something. And sometimes, something was enough. The war was over. The galaxy was changed. And humanity, forged in fire and loss, stood ready to face whatever came next, not as victims, not as supplicants, but as equals who had earned their place among the stars through sacrifice and strength. The Galactic Council had learned its lesson about humanity. They had learned it in the ruin of fleets and the toppling of ancient leaders. They had learned it in the terror that filled these chambers when human warships surrounded them. They had learned it where it all began. And they would never forget.